Okay, we're on DAF Lamed Amid Aleph. We're talking about a stolen lulav. And the question is, what's wrong with it? The Gemara had initially thought that what's wrong with it is that it's not yours. And the Torah says, Ulakachtem lachem. Take it for yourself. It has to belong to you. But the Gemara says, but that's only Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon. That's only a deficiency for the first day of Sukkot. But on all the other 6 days of Sukkot, you're allowed to use a lulav that's not your own. So that can't be the reason. So the Gemara concludes that it's a principle of mitzvah haba ba'avera, that any time an object of a mitzvah comes to you through an avera, you cannot use it anymore for the mitzvah. It's now no longer usable as a mitzvah. Okay, and this is a svara, and the question is it a deoraisa, is it a derabanan? We're not going to get into that right now, but just keep it in mind that there's a lot of Torah about the principle of mitzvah haba ba'avera. And the Gemara now says, Lo shna lifnei yeyush v'lo shna la'achar yeyush. And it makes no difference, we're on the 5th line now, whether it's before the owner has yeyush or after the owner has yeyush. Now what we mean here is the term yeyush is a familiar term to many of us who have studied Bava Metzia. It means giving up hope, relinquishing ownership. Because once a person realizes that he's lost an item either through loss or theft, he at some point gives up hope of ever retrieving it. And when it comes to stolen objects, once a person has yeyush, it becomes possible for the robber to actually acquire the object. Now there's a whole machlokes in the Gemara in Bava Kama as to whether or not yeyush alone is sufficient for the robber to now acquire the object. Or does there need to be something accompanying the yeyush, that sense of giving up hope? As we'll see in a few moments, there are various opinions as to what needs to accompany that yeyush. Either it's some change in the object, some changing of hands of the object, but the bottom line is that even after yeyush, once the object is obtained through an avera, it can no longer be used as a mitzvah, even though the original owner has relinquished ownership. So bishlam alifnei yeyush adam ki yakriv mikem amarachmana v'lav didehu. So the Gemara speaks this idea out. It says, I can understand why you can't use an object, and why we had said before when the prophet Malachi had castigated the people and said, I don't want your animal sacrifices when they're from stolen goods or when the animals are handicapped, because that's not what Hashem wants. So the Gemara had said we compare stolen goods to handicapped animals, that just like handicapped animals are not rectifiable, so too a stolen animal is not rectifiable. I can understand that would be true before the aggrieved party, before the original owner has yeyush, because Adam ki yakriv mikem amarachman v'lav didehu. Because before yeyush, it's not possible for the robber to acquire the stolen object, and therefore, since the Torah requires that the animal that you're bringing as a korban belong to you, and this animal does not belong to him, he can't use it as a korban, and that's why the prophet is castigating them. But if the original owner of the animal has already had yeyush, he's given up hope, then why can't a robber legitimately bring that animal as a korban, because he can now acquire it? So the Gemara says, "Elalav mishum dahavale mitzvah haba be'avera." The answer is because since he acquired it through an avera, it is permanently tainted and can never be used for a mitzvah. Okay, let's continue. Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. My dichsiv, what does the pasuk mean when it says, this is a pasuk in Yeshaya, Ki ani Hashem ohev mishpat sonei gazel be'olah, that I am God who loves justice and who despises thievery when it comes to a burnt offering. So, Mashal Melech Basar V'Dam Shahaya over Al Beis HaMeches. Let's give the following parable. A king is once passing by the royal treasury where all the taxes are collected and stored. Amar la'avadav tenu meches l'mochsim. And the king says, take some money out of the treasury and give it to the tax collectors. So, Amru lo v'halo kol ha'meches kulo shelchahu. So the tax collectors say, or the servants say, why should we do that? It's a waste of time. You're going to take money out of the treasury, give it to the tax man, and he's going to put it right back in the treasury. What's the point? So Amar lahem mimeni yilmadu kol ovrei derachim v'lo yavrichu atzmim min hameches. So the king's response is, I need to set a proper example. Granted, all the money that's collected as tax is going to come back to me, but I need to show people by example how they should pay their taxes. If I pay my taxes, then then everyone will know that they can never evade paying their taxes if even the king has to pay his taxes, right? So what is the analogy to Hashem? Afa Kodesh Baruch Hu Amar, Ani Hashem Soni Gesel Ba'ola, Mimeni Yilmadu B'Bonai V'Yavrichu Asmi Min HaGazel. So Hashem says the same thing, and like Rashi speaks out, who is ultimately the owner of everything in the world? Everything in the world belongs to Hashem. So it makes no difference to Hashem, who's the true owner of all animals in the world, whether Reuven takes an animal from his herd or whether he takes an animal from Shimon's herd. The bottom line is, it all belongs to Hashem anyway. So you could argue, what difference does it make to Hashem whether Reuven takes his own animal or steals Shimon's animal? There's no such thing as theft vis-a-vis God, because everything belongs to God. But the answer is Hashem says, no, I need to set an example. I will not accept an object that is stolen from Shimon, even though it never doesn't belong to Reuven and it doesn't belong to Shimon. Okay, fine. Itmar nami, Amar Rebbe Ami, Yavesh pasal mipnei she'ein hadar, Gazul pasal mishum da'avle mitzvah ba be'avera. So the Gemara is now just demonstrating that this is not just a singular opinion, that the reason why a lulav hagazul is not usable is because it is a mitzvah ba be'avera, but we find that this was actually stated by other Amoraim, that a dry lulav is no good because it's no longer attractive, it's no longer hadar, and a stolen lulav is disqualified because it's a mitzvah ba be'avera. Upliga de Rabbi Yitzchak, but this is in disagreement with Rabbi Yitzchak, who doesn't hold of mitzvah ba be'avera, because the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmeni Amar Shmuel lo shano ela b'yom tov rishon, aval b'yom tov sheni mitoch sheyotze b'shol yotze nami b'gazol. Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't hold of this concept of mitzvah ba be'avera. He says that the only time the Mishnah disqualifies a stolen lulav is on the first day of Sukkot, because the Torah requires that it belong to you. And if it's stolen, it no longer belongs to you. But on day 2 through 7 of Sukkot, if you take a stolen lulav and you shake it, you are Yotzei the mitzvah. So, and what's his argument? It's just like you can borrow a lulav that is not yours and be Yotzei the mitzvah after the first day, so too you can take a stolen lulav. He's not giving you permission to steal, of course. He's saying that if there is a lulav that is stolen, right, you can fulfill the mitzvah with it.
Sorry, Rabbi, forgive me, you may have answered this before, but why is it that the first day is so different?
Because the Torah says explicitly, "Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon." You shall take for yourselves on the first day. So the Torah, it's a gzeras hakasuv. The Torah doesn't provide a reason why dafka on the first day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. So Masiv Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, lulav hagazul v'hayavesh pasul hashaul kasher. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak challenges Rabbi Yitzchak. He says, Rav Nachman says, I don't understand how Rabbi Yitzchak can say that the Mishnah is only disqualifying a stolen lulav on day 1. Look at the Mishnah. It tells you that a stolen lulav and a dry lulav are disqualified. That implies that if it's just a borrowed lulav, it's kosher, because the borrowed lulav is not mentioned in the Mishnah. So Amos, so what day are we talking about? So if the Mishnah is allowing me to use a borrowed lulav, it can't be referring to day 1, because on day 1, a borrowed lulav is just as non-usable as a stolen lulav, because it's not yours. So elalav b'yom tov sheni katani gazul pasuk. So therefore the Mishnah must be addressing all days of Sukkot, including day 2, and it's telling me you're allowed to use a borrowed lulav on day 2, but you cannot use a lulav hagazul on day 2. So you see from here that Rabbi Yitzchak is mistaken. A stolen lulav cannot be used on day 2. So Amar Rava la'olam b'yom tov rishon v'lo mibaya ka'amar. So Rava says, no, that's not a good argument. I'll defend Rabbi Yitzchak. And really, Rabbi Yitzchak will tell you the Mishnah is only talking about the first day of Sukkot. And to your issue that it doesn't address a borrowed lulav, it really does address a borrowed lulav. It's telling me that not only is a borrowed lulav disqualified, but even a stolen lulav is disqualified. And let's speak it out. Lo mi ba yashol delav didehu aval gazul emastam gezela yeyush ba'olam uvididei dami kamash malan. Because I might have thought that there's more of a reason to allow a stolen lulav than a borrowed lulav. A borrowed lulav clearly is not mine, so therefore I cannot be Yotzei the mitzvah with a bar lulav. But a stolen lulav, look, once a lulav is stolen from Ruvain, and he realizes it's stolen, he's going to have Yeush. He's going to give up hope. And therefore, you might think that since he's going to give up hope, then the Goslin has the opportunity to acquire it for himself, and therefore he could be Yotzei with it even on the first day. So comes along the mission and says no, that as long as we haven't heard him explicitly declare that he gives up hope, we have to assume that he doesn't give up hope. That's the way Rabbi Yitzchak will learn it, right? Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't hold of mitzvah abba bi'avera. He doesn't hold of it, right? So therefore, the only issue, the only stigma that he's facing is the fact that it's not mine and it has to belong to me. So the point of the Mishnah is that even though it's stolen, and you might think that everyone who gets something stolen from them is going to have Yeush, comes along, the Mishnah says no. Until you hear from him that he's miyayish, you can't assume that, because like Rashi speaks out, when a person is an aggrieved party, is a victim of theft, he always thinks to himself, I'm going to get that guy, and I'm going to find a way to get back to retrieve my stolen objects. Okay? So that's the way that Rabbi Yitzchak will learn the Mishnah, that it's only talking about day one, because he doesn't hold of mitzvah babi avera.
How is he in Yeush? It's just a small window of opportunity. He has one day to Raizel to do the mitzvah. Right? He's not going to give up so quickly, considering that he only has that one day.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about the guy who is the Baal, who owns it, right?
Right.
Since he only has one day to do the mitzvah, and he just paid $150 for his lulav, right? He's not about to be Yeush so quickly on this day.
Well, that's the chiddush of the Gemara, that you can't assume that he's miyash. The Gemara's thought, by the way, it didn't cost $150 in the times of the Gemara. The Gemara says that an example of a mitzvah that does not involve loss of money is arba minim. Yeah, it is. It's true. It's an example of a mitzvah that does not cost a lot of money. Right? So
there were times they had very little of this.
Yeah, that was in Europe, but in the times of the Gemara, you're in the Middle East. There are palm branches and esrogim growing all over the place. Yeah. Anyway, Amar lahu Rav Huna lahanahu avankari. So the Gemara now tells us a story that Rav Huna once told avankari. Now avankari, Rashi says, are peddlers. These are guys that would get the arba minim and they would sell them on the street. The Aruch has a slightly different translation, but the Rashi's translation works out much better in the context of the story. He said to them, Ki zavnisu asa me'akum lo sigzuzu atun ela ligzuzuhu inhu v'yohavu lechu. He said to them, listen guys, you're going to have suppliers and are going to be providing you with myrtle branches for the hadassim. Make sure that you don't, when you purchase the hadassim from your suppliers, that you don't actually clip the myrtle branches from the myrtle trees, but rather only buy them once the non-Jews clip the myrtle branches and they give you already the detached myrtle branches. Why? My time astam ovdei kolchavim gazloni ar asa ninu v'karka ena nigzeles hilchach ligzezuha inhu ki hechi dilihavu yeish ba'alam biyadayu didhu v'shinei harishus biyadaychu. So the Gemara explains as follows. We have to suspect that non-Jews have stolen real estate from Jews, because these idolaters in the Middle East are very reckless when it comes to seizing other people's real estate. And we have to therefore be choshesh, we have to fear that perhaps the myrtle branches are being stolen from a property that originally belonged to a Jew. The Gemara in Bava Kama says that even though you confiscate someone else's real estate, even though the owner has yeush, it still halachically belongs to the original owner. And there's never a transfer of real estate from the original owner to the robber just because he's squatting on it or has confiscated the real estate. It's different from chattel. Chattel, there's the possibility of once he's stolen it and the owner has yeush, it's possible for the Goslin to acquire it, but not with real estate. So the issue is like this. If you guys go ahead and clip the myrtle branches, granted that once you clip it, it's chattel. So therefore the yeush that the original Jewish owner of the real estate had, let's say 5 years ago, will help to allow the yeush to make, this yeush will be coupled with the fact that you now have this myrtle branch. But the problem is that in order for there to be an exchange of property from the original owner to the person, to another party, Rav Huna says you need two things. You need yeyush of the owner, plus you need shinoi rishus. It has to change hands from the gazlan to a third party. And if you're now clipping it, so you're a participant in the gezel, you're a participant in the act of thievery because it still technically belongs to the Jew at the moment that you're clipping it, and therefore it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. So therefore you're complicit in the avera, and this hadas is not going to be usable for the mitzvah because it's acquired through the act of thievery. So therefore Rav Huna said to them, you better make sure that let the heathen, who will be the exclusive gazlan, let him clip the hadas, so that by the time he gives it to you, that constitutes shinoi rishus. He's changing hands from the gazlan to you, and now this hadas is kosher. It's no longer a mitzvah babi avera when it's in your hands. Okay?
And if he's cutting it for you?
It doesn't matter. Even if he's cutting it for you, nevertheless, there's still a halachic shinoi rishus. It's not like Hilchas Shabbos, where if a goy cooks for you, it becomes problematic, right? This has to do with choshen mishpat. So as long as there's a shinoi rishus, even if he stole it on my behalf, ein shliach lidvar avera, so it's really he's the gazlan, he's transferring it over to me, and then it becomes halachically permissible.
Is there really an expectation of yiyush on a piece of karka? I mean, chattel may be more likely.
Well, that in itself is a good question. However, the Gemara says even though there is yeyush, the yeyush does not help in a situation of real estate. But once the real estate is converted to chattel because the object that's growing is detached from the ground, then yeyush does help. It certainly stands to reason that a particular myrtle branch, there is going to be yeyush. So now the Gemara says, but wait a minute. But sof ki gazazu avankari lihavi yeyush ba'olam biyadaihu b'shinei rishus biyadan. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. What's the problem if these peddlers clip the hadas branch themselves? Okay, granted, maybe they want to avoid being complicit in gezel, but to say that the hadas will be puzzle, the hadas won't be puzzle, so maybe they'll be part of the mitzvah babi avera, because they'll be, or maybe they'll be complicit in the gezel because they're taking something from a Jewish property. But lamaisa, since the owner of the original property was miyash, when they sell it to the customer, that also constitutes a shinoi rishus. So let's say they are considered to be part of the thieving party, but nevertheless they're not keeping it; they're selling it to a customer. So the consumer who buys it from the peddler will also be part of the Shina Rishus. So what's wrong with them clipping it as far as the kashrus of the hadas? So the Gemara answers, Lo tzricha bahoshana di avankari gufayu. So the Gemara answers, the Rav Huna's concern was that in case these peddlers wanted to use the hadas for their own arba minim, and he was telling them, if you want to use it for your own arba minim, we could find for you perhaps a heter, because since there was already yeyush, it's okay for you to clip the hadasim. But lamaisa, you won't be able to use the hadas because it's a mitzvah babi avera if you clip it yourselves. Granted, your customers will be able to use it, but you won't be able to use it, and therefore he said, make sure the idolater, the heathens, clip it without you getting involved. So now the Gemara says, "V'likneyuha b'shinoi maisa." The Gemara says, but still, why can't the peddlers clip it themselves, even if they want to use it for themselves? There's something else besides shinoi rishus called shinoi maisa. And shinoi maisa, when it's coupled with yeyush, also allows the other party to acquire the stolen goods. What is shinoi maisa? Which means if you do some kind of change, let's say I steal a piece of lumber from your yard, and then you're miyash. If I then turn this piece of lumber into a chair or a coffee table, so that's called shinoi maisa. I've changed it in its physical form, and therefore that coupled together with yeyush allows me to be kona the wood. If there's no shinoi maisa, then according to Rav Huna, it would have to go back. But the Gemara's question is, we know there's a Gemara in Bava Kama that says that shinoi maisa together with yeyush also could allow you to be kona. So why can't they clip it? And then the hadas will be kosher because what's going on? You take the hadas and you tie it up together with the arba minim. You tie it up together with the lulav and the arava, and that in itself constitutes a change of form. You're changing it from a singular myrtle branch into the arba minim tied together. So the Gemara says, "Kasavar lulav ein sarach eget." So one answer is because Rav Huna holds you're not obligated to tie it together. You can be yotzi the mitzvah without tying it. So who's to say they will tie it? And ve'imtim salom or lulav tzarech agid shini achos lebriyasu b'shini achos lebriyasu lo shmei shinot. Another, and even if you say that you need to tie it, but nevertheless, just because you've tied something to make it part of a larger group of foliage, that's not considered enough of a shinoi, enough of a change. Because that's a change that is reversible. By just untying them, it remains the original myrtle branch. It's different from taking a piece of lumber and turning it into a coffee table. That's not something you can't take a coffee table, turn it back into a piece of lumber, right? But here, since it's reversible, that's not called enough of a shinoi maisa to allow the person to be kona it and to fulfill the mitzvah with it. So now the Gemara says, "V'likniyo b'shini Hashem." But there's a third thing when it's coupled with yeush, which allows the third party to acquire the object from the original owner, and that is b'shini Hashem, which means that even if there's no change of hands from the thief, even if there's no change in its physical form, but rather its name changes, so that because of a change in its status, it now has a new name, then that also is enough, as the Gemara in Bava Kama discusses, to allow the thief to be kona it. So here too you have a shinui Hashem, demeikara havalei asa bahashta hoshana, because originally it was called a myrtle branch. Now it's called a hoshana. Now, what do we mean it's called a hoshana? Because you do hoshanas with the arba minim when you walk around the shul. And so therefore it's now called a mitzvah object instead of, whereas before it was merely a myrtle branch. Now today, ironically, we don't call our hadassim hoshanas, we call our arava the hoshanas, because we use the aravas on Hoshana Rabbah, that's why we call them hoshanas. But really what the Gemara means is that any one of the four minim is called a hoshana in the sense that it's used for the mitzvah of Sukkot when we say Hoshana Laman Elokeinu, right? So anyway, so the Gemara says you have a Shinoi Hashem. So the Gemara answers no. Meikar nami la'asa Hoshana karule. That no, because even when you're growing myrtle branches in the Middle East, since everyone knows that a myrtle branch can be used as one of the arba minim, they call it, I'm growing Hoshanas. It's like, when I have... when I was living in a home in Pennsylvania, the previous owner had planted an arava bush. He didn't plant an arava bush, he didn't call it a willow tree, he called it, I'm planting my arava bush. Because he knew that the purpose of it was to get free hoshanas, from his arava bush in his backyard. So it's the same thing. When people plant hadassim in a Jewish neighborhood, they're not planting hadassim because they like beautiful myrtle, right? They're planting it because they can harvest hadassim. Okay, so anyway, that's the same principle here. So you don't have shinoi rishus because they want to use it for themselves. You don't have shinoi maisa because tying it is not called a significant enough of a change in its form. And you don't have shinoi Hashem because even when you plant it, you call it a hoshana. Okay, let's go weiter because we have some extra time. Yes?
Can I ask you, this whole thing is based on a maybe, because the Vankari could be taking from a field that wasn't stolen. We don't know that. This is just an assumption.
That's why he's saying you have to assume that it was stolen because you're getting it from idolaters. But you raise a good point, Alan. I want to let you know something. We buy, I don't know if it goes on here, but I know in certain larger cities on two coasts of the world, without naming any names, you find little boys that sell hoshanas, right? I know of a specific case where a person had a willow tree in their backyard, and they woke up one morning in the middle of Chol HaMoed and it was stripped bare. No one had asked them rishus. And the problem is that this is mamash a mitzvah b'abei avera. And it's very important to know, at least the Rav of the community has to know, where the source of these hoshanas are coming from. Because a lot of times people will find them growing wildly, and they'll figure, who cares? They're growing out into the street. I mean, you walk down Clark and you see hoshanas growing out of people's property, right? So a guy could say, well, they're growing out in public property, he must not care. And then they don't realize that there are halachas, there are choshen mishpat halachas. You can't just go and grab someone's foliage, right?
It's more common as people actually go to fields to get tzchach.
Or going to get tzchach. So we're going to learn about stolen tzchach in just a moment. Okay, so now let's go on because we have plenty of time. I want to just do the next little shtickle and we'll continue it tomorrow. Now let's talk about a stolen sukkah. Sukkah gezula ve'hamasachech b'rshus harabim. The Brisa now says a stolen sukkah. So we'll see what a stolen sukkah means. But the other example is if a person puts schach over a public thoroughfare that has 3 walls, and basically he just confiscates it and says, I'm going to use this as my sukkah. So Rabbi Eliezer postel v'chachamim machshir. Rabbi Eliezer says you're not yotzei, the mitzvah, and the chachamim say it's fine. So Amar Rav Nachman machlokas b'shetokef es chavero v'hotzio me sukkasa. The case of a stolen sukkah is where I go over to Alan Steinfeld's backyard, and I see him sitting there singing V'samachta b'chagecha. I physically pick him up and I eject him from his sukkah, and I sit down and I continue the next refrain. That's the example of, that's exactly what the Gemara says. I pick someone up, I throw him out of his sukkah, and I sit down. There's a machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, whether you're yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah or not. But Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei. Rabbi Eliezer, now this is actually, I probably, because I'm Canadian, I say, excuse me, before I pick him up and throw him out. And then I smile and I say, thank you, have a nice day. Right? For Rabbi Eliezer,
I'll bring a drink.
for Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei, Rabbi Eliezer goes according to his reasoning, Da'amar ein adam yotzei yedei chovaso b'sukkaso shel chavera. Because Rabbi Eliezer holds you cannot be yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah with someone else's sukkah. Rabbi Eliezer holds the sukkah, it says, Chaga sukkos ta'aseh lecha shivas yom. Just like there's a din that the lulav has to belong to you on the first day, Rabbi Eliezer also holds that the sukkah has to belong to you as well. And therefore, ikar can exeles sukkah gezulai. He says, so therefore, no matter how you look at it, it's problematic. If real estate is subject to theft, which we've said previously it is, it's just that there's no yeyush. But there's a whole machlokus in the Gemara in Bava Kama whether real estate can be considered stolen property. So there's a machlokus over there. Can you say that if I squat on someone's land, I'm a thief or not? There are ramifications to this question, but over here the clear ramification is, look, if this is considered stolen property, so then it's a mitzvah b'aver, and clearly I can't be yotzei. V'inami karka einan exeles sukkah she'ulahi sukkah she'ulahi. And if you're going to argue, well, no, real estate is not subject to theft. It's just that you're squatting on someone else's land, but it's not called stolen property, so it's not a mitzvah b'aver. But you have another problem over here. The other problem here is it's someone else's sukkah, and you cannot be yotzei the mitzvah with someone else's sukkah. V'rabanan l'tamayu da'amri adam yotzei yedei chavasa b'sukkaso shel chavero. And the Rabbanan who say that I am yotzei the sukkah with Alan Steinfeld's sukkah, it's because they hold that you can borrow someone else's sukkah. You could be yotzei with the mitzvah with someone else's sukkah. The karka einan exeles v'sukkah shulei, and there's no problem of stolen property because the halacha is that real estate is not subject to theft, and therefore it's not a mitzvah b'aveira. I mean, I did something very not nice to Alan, but lamaisa, it's not a mitzvah b'aveira. And as I have to ask him mechila because I violated a very terrible ben adam l'chavero principle of forcibly throwing someone off their land, but I'm not a gazlan in the conventional sense that the sukkah is now a mitzvah b'aveira. Fine. So that's the only time where there's a machlokes. Avol, however, gazal eitzim b'sichei chohen divrei hakol ein lo ela demei eitzim. However, if I steal, this is Rabbi Black's question, what if I steal wood or other schach from someone else's field and I put it over my sukkah? So halachically, everyone, even Rabbi Eliezer, agrees that I'm koina the schach and I'm yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah. And granted, I have a financial obligation to compensate the person whose schach I stole, but I still have the opportunity to be yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah. Mimai, and how do you know this? Because the Brisa had compared a stolen sukkah to a case of placing schach over a public thoroughfare. Marishus arabim karka lav didehu, sukkanami lav karka didehu. That just like a case of putting schach over rishus harabim, you're not the owner of the sukkah, of the real estate. So too in the case of stolen sukkah, we're talking about a case where you're not the owner, and that's the subject of the machlokas. Can you be yotzei with real estate that's not yours or not in the midst of sukkah? But when the real estate is yours, but you merely steal v'schach to place over your real estate, then everyone agrees that it's not a mitzvah b'aveira and you can be yotzei. The question is, why not? So Rashi tells us a principle called takonas hashavim. What is takonas hashavim? The classic example of takonas hashavim is where I go ahead into your lumber yard and I steal a very expensive piece of lumber that could be used as a ceiling beam, a supporting beam for your roof. I steal it, and then I build a multi-million-dollar home with that stolen beam inserted in the roof. You find out about it and you sue me. The court finds in your favor that I stole the beam for you. Now, normally with stolen property, as long as it hasn't been transformed, and as long as it's been changed, I have to return the original object to you. I stole a ceiling beam from you. It's in its original form. So you could argue that the court should require me to completely demolish my home so that I can retrieve the beam and return it to you. But no. The rabbis in their wisdom understood that no one's going to want to demolish their home. I spent millions of dollars building this thing. So they said when there's a tremendous financial loss for the robber to return the stolen property, we allow him to pay cash instead of the original item. And therefore, since Chazal already transferred ownership of this object to you in its entirety, they also removed the stigma of mitzvah haba b'aveira and allow you to be yotzei the mitzvah with this stolen beam. In the same vein, you can be yotzei the mitzvah of SUKKAH even with stolen SUKKAH, because of the same principle of takonas hashavim. It's too difficult to require me to dismantle the structure and to replace it. And therefore I am going to be yotzei the mitzvah. I'm telling this to you the way I seem to understand Rashi. I hope I'm not making a mistake in my explanation, but that's the way I understand it. Okay.